Follow-up question kind of links to this, so I thought I would ask it. But someone else asked, would love to hear more on deconstruction of the faith. Deconstruction.
Easy, good. I don't know. My brain is not ready for that.
Deconstruction. I think I can start.
Beyond me.
Go for it, Mary.
It's beyond me now. It's above me now. Deconstruction. You know what? I think it's helpful to define what we mean by deconstruction.
Okay,
I think when some people hear deconstruction, and no, Israel's gonna define it. Don't worry. But I think when some people hear deconstruction, they think like deconversion. Some people think kind of dissociation from, in essence, orthodoxy. So you start to just imbibe something, and it's like, oh, okay, you don't believe the Bible anymore, or you don't believe Christ is God, or whatever. And some people just see it as almost unlearning of harmful, a harmful belief they had. That with closer examination, they realize that isn't tantamount to something that's foundational for them as a Christian. So whatever way you're thinking through those terms will almost impact what you view deconstruction is.
That's really helpful.
Because some people think, deconstruction is incredibly negative, and they hear deconstruction and they think, oh, alarm bells. But some people see deconstruction as something that you should be constantly be doing.
Okay.
Christians should constantly be deconstructing, should constantly be almost breaking down, taking apart, putting back together why they believe what they believe. So it's almost what side of the plane you land on.
What is the mainstream side, you'll say? What is the side that people tend to refer to? Christians tend to refer to. I
don't know. Most times when someone says deconstruction, people are like, alarm bells, small alarm bells. They're like, what are you deconstructing? Like, what? Because, deconstruction, I know, was linked a lot with like ex-evangelical or something like that, where people are seeing some of the harmful experiences they've had, and that's made them almost repackage their own belief in God. And a lot of times it's just not biblical. So it's tough. Okay. It is really tough. Israel, what's been your experience of deconstruction? We'll come to you, Ejim, because I'm sure you've got your own as well.
I mean, I think it's a mostly American or North American.
I think so too. The first time I heard people say deconstruction was
like an intelligentsia word. It sounded like you sort of you like academic elite Israel. It's like a term you man have
coined.
No, I mean, officially deconstruction is on, c'est Foucault, Derrida, sorry, Jacques Derrida, French philosopher, but it's not in evangelicalism. It's not used in the sense that Derrida uses it. And in evangelicalism, I think it's mostly used in North America. And I think it has to do mostly with the sociological experience of changing your mind about something and the impact it has on your relationship to a particular community. I don't actually think it has to do with what you think about X. While that's what people talk about a lot, because people change their mind on topics all the time. And they don't call it deconstruction. Like, oh, I used to believe this, but I've changed my mind. And when you say it like that, you're just like, oh, right, because human nature, people change their mind. Now, you can change your mind on very important beliefs, and that still have, theological consequences. But you don't really need to, present a whole new term for the idea that you've changed your opinion or you've changed your mind or your beliefs. But I think the sociological impact of deconstruction is essentially there's a communal risk to change your mind on something. So if you go to a church that's far right, conservative, Republican, pro guns, pro Trump, and you change your mind on the church's relationship to politics, you risk being kicked out of that church. And then you risk being isolated. And the group you've grown up in all your life and people you've known all your life, all of a sudden have disowned you and you're all by yourself. And I think that's the most consistent experience of people who deconstruct. So whether they leave Christianity altogether or they just, I don't know, so another typical thing is like become more theologically liberal or change their view on church and society. The most consistent thing across all three of them is a sense of isolation, that there's a risk to naming the fact that I no longer believe this thing because my community will shun me. I think that's what really deconstruction
So is
is.
deconstruction in that? So what is deconstruction there? Because is it that the relationship is what's being deconstructed? So what attaches me to this community is what's being deconstructed. Because that still sounds to me as though the person is still breaking down or at least challenging the body of thought or thinking that binds into the community. So is it fixed on the relationship or actually on like the ideals and stuff? In your opinion, at least.
I think the belief aspect is crucial, but I don't think sufficient to describe deconstruction, because I think what makes it sufficient is that relational experience, and that's why you've had so many people form deconstruction communities, because there's all these different people across, like the US, for example, in different states, who feel isolated and need someone to talk to.
Yeah.
So they want to name their belief, but there's a sense that if I don't feel free to challenge this belief, because my church has made it such a primary doctrine that if I challenge it, they're going to basically kick me out, and I feel isolated. And you notice that even in the US, deconstruction doesn't really exist outside of Protestantism, I think, most broadly. So in Catholic and Eastern Orthodox contexts, you don't really have that, because in a Catholic and Orthodox view of Christianity, you are a Christian by your mere participation in the church. Okay. So even if you change your mind on the doctrine of hell and heaven and sexuality and stuff, if you still go to mass every Sunday, and if you're still in confession, you're still church. Now, obviously, people will maybe challenge you, and you might have a conversation with your priest, and you have a fight, but the priest is not going to kick you out. So you don't have that kind of fear that you can just name, hey, I disagree with the church's teaching on abortion, and the priest is like, well, you shouldn't, but come to mass next week. And, and so, but evangelicalism has much more of a, if you say you're now pro-choice,
ultimatum,
you're out. Like, we're not talking to you anymore. And that's just I think it makes it more of a challenge.
Okay.
Yeah. So what would you say to someone who is in a space of deconstruction or feels like they want to deconstruct? Maybe I can give an example. Maybe they're in a place where they've seen, maybe in recent months, they feel like sin is heavily emphasized in their church, and it's really affecting how they see themselves, and almost feeling like they can never be right with God, and they're wanting to unlearn their view of God's love and being almost identified as a sinner, and that's, maybe they see that as a sense of deconstruction. How would you, like, what advice would you offer to that person if they were in that place or in a similar place? Eddie, I'm looking at you. Eddie, I'm looking at you.
I'm learning. You know, based on what, like, that sweet teaching you just gave on, and obviously I've heard the term being thrown around, and I've sort of seen what people seen what people might be meaning, without sort of going too deep into trying to understand detail. But I mean, look, ultimately, if we're talking about people who are just asking questions, I mean, again, asking questions is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
You know, search the scriptures as they're preaching, look, and ask the questions. And it's so healthy to be in a church where you're encouraged to do that, without the leadership feeling undermined, because that is concerning. You know, if you're in an environment where any question is almost seen as a usurping of authority, especially when you're asking questions with actually like grace and respect for them, then that is concerning. So that's one thing, I think. So being in a space where you can ask questions is very helpful, and it allows you to strengthen your faith and understanding of the doctrine. But I would say to the individual, just examine your heart in this though. So if you are especially if you're imbibing the words such as deconstruct, I might even say even avoid it. But if you feel that adequately describes what you're going through, especially if it challenges maybe some of the definitions you gave, like really examine your heart, because my question is, was there a feeling before you went to deconstruct that you just don't agree with what's being preached or what's being said in the church. So actually, there's a bigger issue. Really, actually, we're here talking about just unbelief and maybe an issue or even just faith, and that's a bigger issue as opposed to simply theorizing it in. I just want to like break it down to its simplest forms, because I don't know if you can really do that with the gospel. The gospel is quite clear. In many ways, the gospel is I was gonna say almost some of its parts, but the gospel is quite clear. God is fully God, fully man. God the Father sent him to take our sins, and Christ willingly came and took our sins, died on the cross. We know the gospel story, died, raised, resurrected, that we might have victory over sin, over death, eternal life. We will be raised in our new bodies. Our sin was put on him. What part of that are you deconstructing?
Maybe you're deconstruction, because you have to remember that men, and it can almost affect that experience. So you almost, and also they can actually add on to the gospel or to culture, Christian culture, things that are harmful.
Yeah, that's clearer.
Yeah. So so you might not be
the gospel.
So you're not. You're definitely not. I don't think it's. Obviously, we all agree it's not. It's not beneficial to deconstruct the actual gospel message
In a way in one of the ways you described, in that you're questioning it in a way that suggests that it's wrong. So actually, what you're dealing with for me isn't deconstruction. It's just faith. And and so let's talk about your. And I don't think at that point, kicking anyone out of church. At that point, still you're that someone couldn't, because there'll be a Christian, but just ask fundamental questions, and I guess you take it step by step and walking them through the gospel. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
But you were saying
no, because I think I just think you just want to do this in community. Yeah. I think Israel spoke about a lot of times those who are in these deconstruction circles or feeling that wanting to do it are always very isolated, almost. I need some time away from the church to just, think about what I believe. And of course, we all do, we all want to be alone with our thoughts, but you really want to be in community, when you really want to sit down and say, okay, this is what I have, just even what you said about being able to ask questions. You want to be able to be in a church where you can ask questions to your pastor, you can ask questions to your friends, you can say, what, guys, this is kind of how I'm feeling, like, this is what I'm going through. Because, you just want to be part of a community. And then ultimately as well, you want to know what your aims are. Like, what is your ultimate aim? Because you see some people say, I just want to understand what I believe, which is a good thing. But then the concern is you may repackage and say, I look at the Bible and I think, this feels like God is angry, or God is this, and I don't agree with this, so I'm just gonna take this and then put it in this, and it's and you're just walking away from kind of orthodox Christianity, isn't it? Which is you're really losing grip of the gospel, and that's kind of the concern. Yeah,
and that's why you just pray that you have good teachers in your church, really good teachers. I mean, the disciples had the best teacher. They asked some wild questions, the disciples. I'm sure some of those questions can be repackaged as deconstructed. The faith in some way, questions in regards to rewards in heaven, and it's like, why are you asking that? It's just some weird questions. After seeing the miraculousness of Jesus, your faith is still like weak, and you're concerned about material things, or and there's things where you're asking, why are you asking that as a reader anyway? And in many ways, that people can have that experience now. You go to a sound church still, hear the sound word, but you find yourself asking questions that really suggest that your faith might not be in a good place. Doesn't mean you should be written off.
No.
Yeah, Christ came after disciples. Like, I mean, I wouldn't have that patience for the disciples. You feel me? But we need that. Yeah, people. We need to be patient. We need to be patient with. Again, we're dealing with people who we believe are believers. Again, once they make claims and are fixed in those claims, and even after maybe elder and teachers talk to them and they stay in those claims, deconstruction for me is irrelevant right now. We're dealing with someone who's just like on the verge of unbelief. Yeah, you know what I mean. So yeah,
I hear that. Israel, what do you think?
question. Yeah, that last part, Jim, just the need for patience to work with, in the context of a church, to work through those questions is crucial to me. I have more, I think I have a lot of compassion for those who are deconstructing or on the verge of beginning or find themselves in there at the end. And most of my recommendations tend to be geared towards church leaders, because I think most church leaders and then some Christians don't recognize just how religiously diverse our world is now. Even in a place where, even so, like in the US, there's still a lot of like majority Christian Bible Belt regions, but just by virtue of social media and the internet, we have access to so many different views and opinions about something. And we no longer live in a world where your denomination has a monopoly, right? There was a time when, if you're in Italy, you were Catholic. If you're in Germany, you were Lutheran.
Yeah.
If you're in England, you're Anglican. Like, these are the options. But now I just have to open my phone and I can literally pull up a list of every single religious belief and have very, very serious arguments for each of them.
Yeah.
From scholars who spent 20 years presenting them. So it means for church leaders, you just can't preach assuming that everyone in your congregation just gets it. They're just tracking with you. Because they could, in that moment, pick up their phone and say, what's another interpretation of this passage?
Yeah.
And then you have to now argue with some scholar from first year who's got 5 reasons why you're wrong. And that takes patience. Like, you can't, you have to deal with that seriously and not just kind of dismiss people's contentions, because just way too much out there to assume that anyone listening to you just gets what you're saying. So yeah, I would direct my thoughts mostly to church leaders as opposed to those actually experiencing deconstruction. Yeah.
No.